Alice Thompson had never been one to keep her thoughts to herself. In fact, it was one of the reasons she got into so much trouble at work. As a waitress at Le Petit Mirage, a high-end restaurant nestled in the heart of downtown, Alice was supposed to exude grace, patience, and charm, qualities that didn't quite align with her personality. She had big dreams. Dreams that didn't involve balancing trays of fine wine and pretending to care about customers' dietary restrictions. She had always wanted to own her own business, maybe a little coffee shop or bookstore. But reality had a funny way of keeping those dreams on the back burner. And as much as she hated to admit it, waiting tables had become a routine she couldn't escape. The pay wasn't great, but the tips could be generous, especially when serving the kind of people who frequented Le Petit Mirage. It was one of those places where the food was as fancy as the guests, and the staff, all sharply dressed in black and white, moved like they were part of a ballet. Alice, though, had never quite fit into the ballet aspect. Her movements were sharp and quick, not fluid or graceful. That evening, as she adjusted her apron and ran a hand through her messy brown hair, she couldn't help but feel a sense of impending doom. It was another Friday night, one of the busiest nights of the week, and she was already dreading the long hours ahead. The restaurant was packed, the clinking of silverware and the hum of conversation creating a symphony of sounds in the background. But for Alice, the music was more like a cacophony, each note reminding her how trapped she felt. "Table 7 needs another bottle of Chardonnay," said Linda, the head waitress, as she breezed past Alice, gliding effortlessly through the sea of guests. Alice shot her a look of irritation. Linda was the epitome of what Alice could never be: elegant, composed, and universally adored by both the customers and the boss. Linda was everything Alice wasn't, and that drove her crazy. Taking a deep breath, Alice made her way toward table 7, her heels clicking against the marble floor. As she approached, she noticed the man sitting at the table, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and sharp features. He looked familiar, though Alice couldn't place him. Maybe he was an actor, she thought. A businessman. But she didn't have time to figure it out. She was too busy juggling the demands of her other tables. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice flat as she approached the table with a bottle of wine in hand. "Can I offer you a refill?" The man looked up at her, his gaze calm, almost too calm, and nodded. "Sure," he said with a slight smile. His voice was deep, almost soothing, but Alice didn't pay it much attention. She was too focused on getting this task done quickly. She poured the wine into his glass, the red liquid swirling slowly around the bowl. As she set the bottle down on the table, she couldn't help but overhear him murmur, "This wine is a bit too warm." Alice bit back the snarky remark that popped into her head. She had heard this complaint a million times. "I'm sorry, sir, I'll take it back and bring you a fresh one," she said, plastering a fake smile on her face. As she turned to walk away, she heard him speak again, his tone more direct this time. "Actually, it's fine. I don't need another one." She paused, glancing back at him with a slight frown. "Well, it's my job to make sure you're satisfied. If you don't like it, I'll bring you a new one." The man raised an eyebrow. "You seem pretty sure of yourself." Alice didn't know why, but his calm demeanor annoyed her. She had a million things to do, and here was this guy acting like he was too important to care about a simple wine refill. "I'm just trying to do my job, sir," she replied, her tone cool and unbothered. "But if you don't want the wine, I'll just leave you to enjoy your meal." The man looked at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Okay then," he said, almost as if he were making a mental note of something. "But it's always good to be sure of yourself, isn't it?" Alice didn't bother to respond. She had more important things to do than engage in some philosophical conversation with a customer. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, but she chose not to look back. She spent the next few hours bouncing from one table to the next, trying to keep up with the orders and demands. The night was chaotic, and Alice found herself more irritable than usual. By the time the dinner rush started to wind down, her patience was running thin. That was when she caught sight of him again, table 7, now completely empty except for the remnants of a meal. The man had finished eating, and it was time to clear the table. As Alice approached, she felt a strange tension in the air. He was still sitting there, alone, tapping away on his phone. She wasn't sure why, but the sight of him, relaxed and calm, irritated her. Maybe it was the fact that he was so composed, while she felt like she was constantly struggling to keep it all together. She had always hated people who seemed to have it all figured out. "Your check, sir?" Alice asked as she dropped the bill on the table, not bothering to make eye contact. He looked up at her, his gaze sharp and thoughtful. "Actually, I have a question for you," he said, his voice calm yet direct. "Sure," Alice replied, her mind already racing ahead to the next task. "Do you always speak to your customers like that?" he asked, his voice not unkind, but with a hint of amusement. Alice blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "You seem a little quick to dismiss people," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Don't you think that might affect your service?" Alice felt her temper flare. She had heard enough of this kind of feedback in her time as a waitress. It was always the same, customers complaining about her attitude when she was just trying to do her job. She was sick of it. "I don't have time to coddle people, all right," she snapped, her voice rising just a little. "I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to work." The man raised his hands in mock surrender, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Fair enough," he said, "but you might want to rethink that attitude if you want to keep your job here." Alice's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't say anything. She simply turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. As she made her way back to the kitchen, she tried to shake off the encounter. It was just one customer, after all. Nothing more. But deep down, Alice couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something more to this man. Something about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, had unsettled her. Little did she know, this man wasn't just any customer. He was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Alice's night dragged on, as it often did on Fridays. The rhythm of the restaurant, the chatter of patrons, and the clink of silverware melded into a familiar hum she could almost tune out. But the encounter with the man at table 7 kept creeping into her thoughts. She couldn't shake the image of his calm, measured demeanor. It irritated her more than she liked to admit. She had been working at Le Petit Mirage for almost a year now, and while she had seen her fair share of celebrities, businessmen, and socialites, she'd never met anyone quite like him. Not that it mattered. He was just another customer, right? She was here to work, not to get wrapped up in idle chatter or judgments about people she barely knew. But something about that conversation lingered in the air, and she hated it. As the evening wore on, the restaurant started to clear out. The soft glow of the chandeliers, the last traces of laughter, and the smell of half-empty plates made the atmosphere feel oddly peaceful. Alice wiped her hands on her apron and moved toward the bar to grab a quick drink of water. Her feet ached, and her shoulders were sore from carrying tray after tray of food. She needed a break, one she wouldn't get for at least another hour. That was when Linda, the head waitress, approached her with a knowing look on her face. "You still have that attitude, huh?" she asked, her voice light but filled with that typical condescending tone Alice had come to expect from her. Alice rolled her eyes. "What do you mean?" Linda crossed her arms, surveying the room with an air of superiority. "Table 7, she said simply. "That guy you snapped at, he's one of the owners." Alice froze mid-drink, the water nearly spilling from her glass. "What?" Linda's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Yeah. He owns the place." "Keanu Reeves, ever heard of him?" she asked casually, as if she were talking about the weather. Alice blinked a few times, not sure if she had heard right. "Keanu Reeves," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda shrugged. "He comes in here all the time. You're not the first one to get his attention with an attitude like that. But you might be the first to do it so boldly." Alice felt the color drain from her face. "No way," she muttered under her breath. "How could I have been so?" Linda smiled. "You're not the first. Trust me, he likes to keep a low profile. No one really knows he's the owner unless they're really paying attention." She gave Alice a look, a mix of pity and amusement. "But hey, at least he didn't fire you, right? That's insane." Alice could feel her stomach turn into knots. She had no idea she had been insulting someone so important. She thought he was just another difficult customer, one of those people who like to make a big deal out of the smallest things. But now, the idea that she'd insulted Keanu Reeves, one of the wealthiest and most famous actors on the planet, made her feel like the floor had dropped out from under her. "Yeah, well, I wouldn't get too comfortable," Linda added with a smirk. "He has a funny way of teaching people lessons. You might want to be a little nicer next time." "How do you even know this?" Alice asked, her mind racing. Linda shrugged again. "I just know things. You'd be surprised what you learn when you've been around long enough." Alice stood there, frozen in place, trying to absorb the information. Her head felt like it was spinning. She had just insulted Keanu Reeves, the guy from the action films and the romantic comedies. How had she not known? How could she have been so blind? Her hand started to tremble, and she set the glass of water down on the bar. She had to do something. She had to apologize, right? But how? What could she even say? She had never been good at apologies, especially when she felt like she had been right, or at least justified in her frustrations. But this? This was different. She had gone too far. And now, she was worried that her attitude might cost her job, maybe even more than that. Just as Alice was about to drown herself in a sea of regret, Linda's voice broke through her thoughts. "He's gone now, but don't be surprised if he shows up again soon. If I were you, I'd think carefully about how to approach him next time. He might not be as forgiving." Alice nodded, her thoughts a jumbled mess. Linda's warning echoed in her mind as she headed back into the main dining area, still unsure of what to do next. Later that night, after her shift was finally over, Alice walked home in a haze, the city lights blurring into a wash of neon. Her apartment was a small, modest space, tucked away on the third floor of an old building, the kind of place that always smelled faintly of dust and old pizza. It was a far cry from the life she had imagined for herself. But it was all she could afford, at least, for now. As she climbed into bed that night, her phone buzzed with a message from her grandmother, who lived a few states away. Alice smiled softly, glad for the brief distraction. "Grandma, how's the job, sweetie? Remember, always treat others with kindness, no matter what they do. That's the best way to get ahead in life. I know it's hard, but it's always worth it in the end. Don't forget that." Alice stared at the message for a moment, her heart heavy. It was like her grandmother knew she needed to hear those words. Alice hadn't been particularly kind to anyone today, least of all the man who owned the restaurant. Sighing, she set the phone down on her nightstand. She knew her grandmother was right. Life wasn't about being right all the time or proving a point. It was about how you treated people. And today, she had failed at that. Badly. As she turned off the light and closed her eyes, Alice couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. She had insulted Keanu Reeves, the man who owned the very restaurant she worked in. Would he fire her? Would he give her a second chance? The uncertainty hung over her like a thick fog, one that she couldn't shake. All she could do now was wait and hope she hadn't just ruined everything. Alice woke up the next morning to the shrill buzz of her alarm. She groaned and swatted at it, pulling the covers over her head to block out the sunlight streaming through the window. The events of last night felt like a dream, but when she opened her eyes, the sinking feeling in her stomach reminded her that it was all too real. She had insulted Keanu Reeves. She still couldn't believe it. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind as she sluggishly pulled herself out of bed. Always treat others with kindness. Alice had failed spectacularly at that last night, and now she wasn't sure how she was going to face him, or anyone, for that matter, at work. With a sigh, she dragged herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face in an attempt to wake up. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her messy hair and tired eyes staring back at her. "Get it together, Alice," she muttered to herself. It was just one mistake, right? But it felt like so much more. As she made herself a quick breakfast, coffee and toast, her mind kept going back to the moment she'd realized who her customer really was. She couldn't understand why she had been so quick to brush him off. Maybe she was just fed up with people, or maybe she was just tired of being stuck in a job she didn't want. But whatever the reason, it had been a huge misstep. When Alice arrived at Le Petit Mirage later that afternoon, her stomach churned with anxiety. The restaurant was quieter during the lunch rush, but the atmosphere still felt charged with the kind of tension she wasn't used to. She spotted Linda chatting with a fellow waitress in the corner, her perfectly styled hair and bright smile lighting up the room. Alice hated that she could never live up to Linda's calm, collected demeanor. But today, more than ever, Linda's perfection seemed to mock her. Taking a deep breath, Alice walked over to the staff area, ready to face whatever consequences awaited her. She found herself pacing nervously in the back, rehearsing her apology over and over in her head. How did one apologize to someone like Keanu Reeves? Would he even care? Would he even remember her? Her thoughts were interrupted when the sound of the front door chimed, signaling the arrival of new guests. Alice froze. She knew, without a doubt, who was walking through that door. There he was, standing tall with his hands in his pockets, looking just as effortlessly cool as he had the night before. Keanu Reeves, the man who had every right to be offended by her brash attitude, was walking into the restaurant like it was any other day. His eyes scanned the room, and Alice quickly ducked behind a pillar, hoping he wouldn't see her. But of course, he did. Of course, he had to see her. She caught the glint in his eye as he made his way toward the hostess stand, and for a split second, Alice's heart stopped. She felt exposed, as if she were standing on a stage with everyone watching. It wasn't just that she had been rude to a customer, no, it was the fact that she had been rude to him, to Keanu Reeves himself. Linda, ever the professional, greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Reeves, it's always a pleasure to see you," she said, her voice dripping with charm. Keanu gave her a small, polite nod, but Alice noticed that he didn't seem overly enthusiastic. It was as though he was here on business rather than pleasure. "Just a table for one today," he said, his deep voice calm but firm. "Of course," Linda replied, already turning to lead him to a table. Alice stood frozen for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Apologize? Ignore him? Or simply pretend it hadn't happened? But her mind was racing, and none of the options felt right. She couldn't just pretend it didn't happen, the last thing she wanted was for him to think she was avoiding him. With a deep breath, Alice walked over to the table where Keanu had been seated, trying her best to appear composed. Her heart was pounding, and her palms were sweaty, but she was determined to make things right. Keanu was already seated, scanning the menu with a calm expression. He didn't look angry, if anything, he looked neutral, perhaps even a little detached. But that only made Alice more nervous. What if he was planning to fire her? What if he was silently judging her, waiting for the right moment to let her know how unprofessional she had been? Mr. Reeves?" Alice said, her voice shaking slightly. She cursed herself for sounding so unsure, but it was hard to shake the feeling of humiliation. I just wanted to apologize for my behavior last night. I was rude, and you didn't deserve that. Keanu looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the silence between them felt deafening. But then, to Alice's surprise, he gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "It's all right," he said, his voice low but reassuring. "I wasn't offended, really." Alice blinked in disbelief. "You weren't?" "No," he replied, leaning back in his chair slightly. "It's easy to get caught up in the stress of things. I know how hard it is to work in a place like this." Alice was taken aback. She hadn't expected him to be so understanding. "Still, that doesn't excuse my attitude. I shouldn't have snapped at you." Keanu's smile widened just a bit. "I understand. And, for what it's worth, I appreciate the apology. Not everyone is willing to admit when they're wrong." Alice felt a small wave of relief wash over her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't about to lose her job after all. "I really didn't mean to make things awkward," Alice said, her voice softening. I've been a little stressed lately. But that's no excuse for acting like that. So, again, I'm sorry." Keanu studied her for a moment before nodding. "I get it," he said simply. "But, in the end, you're just doing your job. We all have those moments." Alice felt a small sense of weight lifting from her chest. She wasn't entirely off the hook, but this conversation had given her hope. Maybe it wasn't the end of the world. Maybe she could still redeem herself. "I'll make sure to get your order right this time," she said, forcing a more genuine smile. Keanu smiled back. "I'm sure you will." As Alice walked away, she couldn't believe what had just happened. The tension that had been swirling around her all morning seemed to evaporate. Maybe it wasn't the best apology in the world, but it was a start. And more importantly, Keanu wasn't holding it against her. But Alice knew this wasn't over. There were still lessons to be learned, and there was more to this story than she could yet see. The interaction had only scratched the surface. What else did Keanu Reeves have in store for her? The following days passed slowly for Alice, but something had changed in the air. The tension she had carried with her after the uncomfortable encounter with Keanu had gradually started to fade. She still felt the weight of that moment, but it no longer weighed her down the way it had before. It was almost as though a shift had occurred in her outlook. Keanu hadn't returned to the restaurant the next day, or the day after. Alice had half expected him to come back, if only to let her know whether her apology had been enough or if there would be consequences for her attitude. But each day she worked, and each time the door chimed to welcome in a new set of customers, her heart would leap in her chest, and then fall back into place when she realized it wasn't him. The routine had settled back into its usual rhythm, the clinking of plates, the chatter of patrons, and Linda's almost perfect air of control in every situation. For Alice, work had become a daily challenge. Part of her felt like she was treading water in a pool of uncertainty. But the one thing that kept her going was the idea of facing Keanu again, of proving that she had learned her lesson, and maybe even earning a second chance. It was just another regular Thursday evening when it happened. Alice had just finished serving a table when Linda waved her over to the bar with a mysterious look on her face. "Alice, can you come here for a second?" she called out, leaning against the counter with her usual cool composure. Her voice had that undertone of excitement, the one that told Alice something unexpected was coming. "Yeah?" Alice asked, walking over cautiously. Linda grinned. "You're in luck. Table 12 wants to speak with you." Alice blinked. Table 12. She looked around, expecting to see a group of rowdy customers or someone giving her a complaint. But instead, she saw Keanu sitting alone at a table near the back of the restaurant, his signature calm demeanor apparent even from a distance. "Mr. Reeves?" Alice said, barely believing her eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Was he going to fire me now? The thought of facing him again sent a knot into her stomach. But this time, instead of dread, there was something else in his eyes. Something that was neither judgmental nor distant, but instead warm and, strangely, reassuring. Alice walked toward him with shaky steps, trying to keep her composure. "Hi," she said, standing awkwardly by the table. Keanu looked up at her, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Hey, Alice. I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." She blinked, unsure of what to say. No, not at all. Is everything okay?" Keanu gave a small nod. "Yeah, I'm good. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot." Alice felt her palms start to sweat. "I'm listening," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Look, you've probably been wondering if that little incident the other day was going to cost you your job," he said, leaning back in his chair, his calm expression never faltering. She couldn't help but nod. "Yeah, I've been thinking about it. I was really worried." He raised a hand in a placating gesture. "I wasn't offended, really. And while some people might have held a grudge, I appreciate the way you handled the situation. You came over and apologized without hesitation, and that speaks volumes to me." Alice blinked, trying to process his words. She'd expected him to be more distant, more cold, but this was different. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet, trying not to let the surprise overwhelm her. He smiled again. "So, here's the thing. I've been thinking about the way you handled yourself, and I think you have a lot of potential. I'm actually part owner of this restaurant. I'm not usually the one who interacts with the staff, but I've been around enough to know when someone's doing their job well, or when they're not giving their best." Alice's mind raced. He's an owner, and he's noticed me. She wasn't sure if she should be relieved or more anxious. "You seem like someone who's capable of handling more responsibility than just waiting tables. I'd like to offer you a bit of a chance," Keanu said, his tone serious but not intimidating. "Chance? What do you mean?" Alice asked, her curiosity piqued. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm looking to open a new venture, a more upscale restaurant, one that requires a bit more finesse, a bit more heart. I've been considering who I'd want to bring on board for the project, and after what I've seen here, I think you might be a good fit." Alice's mind was spinning. "Wait, what? He's offering me a chance to work with him on a new restaurant? Wait, you want me to join you on this new project?" Alice asked, unable to hide the disbelief in her voice. Keanu nodded, that easy smile returning to his face. "Exactly. I'm not offering you a position as a server here, I'm offering you a chance to learn the ropes in something bigger. You'd be in charge of managing the staff, overseeing operations, and maybe even helping with the concept. I think you've got what it takes." Alice was stunned. This wasn't the conversation she had expected to have. This wasn't about being fired. This wasn't about her mistake. It was an opportunity, a massive opportunity that she had never dreamed of in a million years. "You're serious?" she asked, still not quite able to grasp what was happening. "I'm serious," Keanu said. "I've seen a lot of people in the restaurant industry, but I can tell you have something special. I think you'd be perfect for this. What do you think?" Alice took a deep breath. This wasn't just a second chance, this was a door opening to a completely different path. And for the first time in a long while, she felt like she might actually have the chance to make something of herself. I think I'd love the chance," she said, finally allowing herself to smile. Keanu nodded, his smile widening. "Great. We'll set up a meeting and discuss the details. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do." As Alice walked away from the table, her heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe it. What had just happened? She had gone from thinking her job was on the line to being handed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It felt surreal. But she knew one thing for sure, this was only the beginning of something much bigger than she could have imagined. Alice's head was spinning as she walked back to the staff area, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Keanu Reeves had just offered her a life-changing opportunity. She had come into work that day, as usual, feeling trapped and uncertain about her future. But now, everything had changed in the span of a single conversation. She could barely focus as she passed through the kitchen, her eyes unfocused, her thoughts elsewhere. The bustling of chefs, the clanging of pots and pans, the faint hum of the restaurant, none of it seemed to matter right now. The only thing that mattered was the decision she had just made. But was it the right one? She found herself back in the staff room, her hands trembling as she hung her apron on a hook. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't help but replay the conversation over and over in her head. It had happened so fast, so unexpectedly. How could I go from being just a waitress to managing a new restaurant project with Keanu Reeves? The very idea seemed impossible. The sound of footsteps behind her snapped Alice out of her thoughts. She turned around to find Linda approaching, her expression curious. "You okay?" Linda asked, her brow furrowed slightly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alice took a deep breath and gave Linda a shaky smile. "I think I just got offered a job I can't turn down." Linda raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Keanu Reeves just asked me to join him in opening a new restaurant," Alice said, still struggling to wrap her mind around it. "He wants me to help manage it, maybe even oversee the operations." "Can you believe that?" Linda's mouth fell open. "Wait, what? Keanu Reeves? The Keanu Reeves? The actor?" "Yes, the actor," Alice confirmed, still trying to process it all. "Apparently, he's part owner of this place, and he's starting something bigger. And he wants me to be a part of it." Linda blinked, clearly stunned by the news. "Alice, that's huge. You don't just get offered something like that out of the blue. Are you sure you're ready for it?" Alice bit her lip, her mind still swirling with uncertainty. "I don't know. I mean, it's a huge opportunity, but it's also terrifying. What if I fail? What if I'm not cut out for it?" Linda stepped closer, placing a hand on Alice's shoulder. "Listen, if there's anyone who can do this, it's you. You've got the drive, the work ethic, and the heart to make it happen. Keanu obviously sees something in you that most people don't. You'd be crazy not to at least give it a shot." Alice hesitated, unsure. The fear of failure was so real, so immediate. But Linda was right. This was an opportunity that didn't come around every day. And if she didn't take the leap now, would she regret it forever? "I know you're right," Alice said, her voice soft. "But it feels like such a huge change. I've never done anything like this before." Linda smiled warmly. "That's the point. You're not supposed to have all the answers right now. But this is your chance to learn, to grow, and to prove to yourself that you can do more than just wait tables. You owe it to yourself to try." Alice took a deep breath, the weight of Linda's words sinking in. Maybe this was the sign she had been waiting for. Maybe this was her moment to finally step out of the shadows and take control of her future. "You're right," Alice said, more confidently this time. "I can do this." Linda grinned. "That's the spirit. So, what's the next step?" Alice smiled back, feeling a surge of determination. "I'm meeting with him tomorrow to go over the details." The next morning, Alice arrived at the restaurant early, her heart racing with anticipation. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but she knew she had to give it everything she had. This was the beginning of something big, and she couldn't afford to mess it up. When she arrived, Keanu was already there, waiting at a table in the corner. He had a calm, collected air about him, as always, but today there was a sense of purpose in his eyes. He stood up as Alice approached, offering a friendly smile. "Hey, Alice," he said, his tone warm but professional. "Thanks for coming in early." "Of course," Alice replied, trying to steady her nerves. "I'm really looking forward to discussing everything." Keanu motioned for her to sit down. "Let's get right into it. So, as I mentioned the other day, I'm opening a new restaurant. I want it to be a place that's not just about good food, but also about creating a community, an experience that people can connect to. And I think you can help me make that happen." Alice nodded, listening intently. "I think that sounds amazing. But I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. I've never done anything like this before. How do I even begin to manage a project like this?" Keanu leaned forward, his gaze steady. "That's exactly why I think you're the right person for the job. You're passionate, you care about people, and you've shown me that you can handle pressure. You'll have a lot of support along the way, and I'll be there to guide you. The most important thing is to trust yourself and your instincts. The rest will fall into place." Alice felt a surge of hope. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to build something meaningful, something that could change her life forever. But the responsibility, the weight of it all, still felt overwhelming. Keanu seemed to sense her hesitation. "Look, this won't be easy. There will be challenges, no doubt. But if you can take that first step, trust that you can learn and adapt, I believe you'll thrive." Alice took a deep breath, looking him in the eye. "Okay. I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes." Keanu smiled, his expression softening. "I knew you would be. Welcome aboard, Alice." And with that, everything changed. Alice had taken the leap. She was no longer just a waitress, she was part of something bigger. A new journey awaited her, one that would challenge her, push her to her limits, and ultimately transform her life in ways she could never have imagined. Alice's head was spinning as she left the restaurant that afternoon, the words, "Welcome aboard," still ringing in her ears. She had officially accepted Keanu's offer. But as she walked out of the restaurant and into the busy streets of the city, reality began to set in. She had taken a giant leap of faith, but now came the hard part, actually making this work. Could she live up to Keanu's expectations? Would she be able to handle the pressure of managing a new restaurant? It was a lot to think about. She wandered aimlessly through the streets, trying to clear her mind. The city around her felt different now, as though she was standing on the edge of a new world. There were so many possibilities, and yet so many risks. The thought of leaving her familiar routine behind, the late-night shifts, the grumpy customers, the limited tips, was both exhilarating and terrifying. This new opportunity had the potential to change everything. But what if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? Alice shook her head, pushing the negative thoughts away. She had made the decision, and there was no turning back now. She just had to trust herself, trust that she could learn and grow, and believe that this was the right path for her. As she walked back to her apartment, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to see a text from Linda. "So, are you officially a Keanu-recruited superstar now?" Alice smiled and quickly typed a response. "Yep. I've joined the team. I'm scared but excited. I think I'm in way over my head." The reply came almost immediately. "You've got this. Don't doubt yourself. This is huge. I'm so proud of you." Alice couldn't help but grin at the message. Linda had always been her biggest cheerleader, and that was something Alice truly appreciated. Having someone in her corner made the whole thing feel a little less intimidating. When Alice got home, she paced back and forth in her small apartment, barely able to sit still. The next few days were going to be a whirlwind of meetings, planning, and more decisions than she could ever have imagined. She couldn't afford to overthink it. She just had to go in, do her best, and take it one step at a time. That evening, as she sat down to eat a quick dinner, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email. She quickly clicked it open and saw a message from Keanu. "Hey Alice, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to give you some more information before our next meeting. I've attached a brief outline of the restaurant's concept, the vision I have for it, and some of the goals we'll need to discuss in more detail. Please take a look, and we can go over everything in our next meeting. Looking forward to working with you." Alice opened the attachment, and as she skimmed through the document, her excitement grew. The concept was ambitious, modern, yet cozy. The food would be upscale, but not pretentious. The atmosphere would be warm, welcoming, and accessible to all kinds of people. Keanu had big ideas, and he seemed to know exactly what he wanted. But there were still so many unanswered questions, so many pieces to the puzzle. She closed the email and took a deep breath. This was it. This was her chance to make something of herself. The next few days were a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and late nights filled with excitement and uncertainty. Alice was thrown into the deep end. She learned about the restaurant's finances, the challenges of managing staff, the art of crafting the perfect menu, and the importance of building a brand that could stand out in an already crowded industry. It was overwhelming at times, but she quickly realized that Keanu wasn't just offering her a position, he was mentoring her, teaching her every step of the way. Keanu's guidance was steady and patient. Whenever Alice felt unsure about a decision, he was there to offer advice, pointing her in the right direction without ever making her feel incompetent. His confidence in her ability to succeed began to rub off on her, and slowly but surely, she started to feel like she belonged. But even with all the support Keanu provided, Alice couldn't help but wonder if she had what it took to handle everything. Each day brought new challenges, problems with suppliers, a shift in the vision for the decor, conflicts between potential staff members, but Alice tackled each obstacle with determination, using her growing knowledge and experience to find solutions. Still, the pressure was mounting. One morning, as Alice sat in the office with Keanu going over the day's agenda, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a text from Linda. "How's it going with the new project? Are you surviving yet?" Alice chuckled and quickly typed back. "It's a lot, but I'm hanging in there. I'm learning so much, but it feels like I'm in over my head sometimes." A reply came almost immediately. "Don't worry, you're doing great. Just breathe. You've got this." Alice smiled at the encouraging message. It was just what she needed. She put the phone back in her pocket and refocused on the meeting. Keanu was talking about the menu redesign, and Alice couldn't help but feel her heart race as they discussed the final touches. This was real. This was happening. Weeks passed, and the restaurant started to take shape. The walls were being painted, the furniture was arriving, and the team of chefs was coming together. Alice found herself spending more and more time at the restaurant, overseeing every detail, making sure everything was running smoothly. The stress was constant, but it was also exciting. Every challenge felt like an opportunity to prove herself, and every small success gave her a sense of accomplishment she had never felt before. One afternoon, as Alice was meeting with the team to finalize the menu, she looked around and realized something incredible: she was part of something bigger than herself. She had started this journey as a waitress, unsure of her future, but now she was building something from the ground up. She was shaping the future of the restaurant, and her ideas were being heard and valued. It was a long way from where she had started, but Alice was beginning to realize that the road less traveled wasn't so scary after all. The weeks blurred together as Alice adjusted to her new role. She had spent days navigating the world of high-end restaurant management, training staff, selecting vendors, and constantly tweaking the restaurant's branding to ensure it matched Keanu's vision. It was a whirlwind, but she felt like she was getting the hang of it. But there was something in the back of her mind, a gnawing doubt that she couldn't shake. For every success she achieved, a little voice whispered, "What if you're not enough?" One Thursday evening, as Alice worked alongside the rest of the staff, preparing for the grand opening, the tension in the air was palpable. Everything had to be perfect. It felt like the culmination of months of hard work, and with Keanu watching from the sidelines, it added another layer of pressure. As the hours passed, Alice found herself growing more anxious. There were still loose ends, minor issues with the wine list, some last-minute tweaks to the interior design, and a missing shipment of glassware that was due to arrive before the night's big event. At one point, Alice found herself alone in the storage room, taking a breather to collect her thoughts. She closed her eyes, leaning against a shelf. The weight of everything was starting to get to her. It was supposed to be exciting, the opening of a new restaurant, working with someone as high-profile as Keanu Reeves, but instead, it felt like a pressure cooker. Am I really ready for this? She had been pushing herself so hard to prove she could handle it all. But what if, in trying to live up to everyone else's expectations, she had lost sight of her own? What if she wasn't cut out for this after all? The sound of the door opening interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Keanu stepping into the room, his usual calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm of anxiety Alice was experiencing. "Hey, you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Alice forced a smile, brushing away the doubt that had crept into her mind. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little overwhelmed, I guess." Keanu raised an eyebrow, stepping closer. "It's okay to feel that way. This is a big step. But remember, you're not in this alone. We've got a great team behind us." "I know," Alice replied, her voice wavering slightly. "It's just, I don't want to mess this up. This opportunity is so big, and I can't help but wonder if I'm the right person for the job." Keanu took a moment to think, his expression thoughtful. "I get it. You're facing a lot of pressure, and it can be overwhelming. But you have everything you need to succeed. You've already proven you've got what it takes. I wouldn't have asked you to be a part of this if I didn't believe in you." Alice sighed, running a hand through her hair. "It's just, there's so much at stake. The restaurant, the team, the customers. I'm worried that I'm going to fail, that all of this will fall apart." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "The truth is, we can't control everything. There will always be setbacks and challenges. But that's where growth happens. Every obstacle is an opportunity to learn. The key is not to be afraid of failure, but to embrace it as part of the journey." Alice nodded slowly, trying to take in his words. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable, but there was something about Keanu's calm presence that made her feel like she wasn't facing this challenge alone. "You're right," she said quietly. "I just need to trust myself more." Keanu gave her an encouraging look. "Exactly. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. You've got a lot of heart, Alice. That's what matters most." A small smile tugged at the corner of Alice's lips. "Thanks, Keanu. I needed to hear that." "No problem," he replied. "Now, let's get back out there. The grand opening is right around the corner, and I have no doubt it's going to be a huge success." As Keanu walked out of the room, Alice stayed behind for a moment, taking a deep breath. She was still nervous, but something had shifted inside her. Maybe she wasn't perfect, and maybe she would make mistakes. But she didn't have to carry the weight of it all by herself. She had a team, and she had Keanu's support. That was enough to get her through. The grand opening arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with energy. The lights were dimmed just right, the scent of delicious food wafted through the air, and the atmosphere was nothing short of magical. Every table was filled, and Alice could feel the excitement building. As the evening unfolded, Alice moved around the dining area, checking in with the staff, making sure everything was running smoothly. Despite the chaos and her racing nerves, she couldn't help but feel proud. This was her dream coming to life. And despite all the challenges, it was working. At one point, Alice stepped into the back kitchen to grab a quick break, and she saw Keanu standing there, talking to a few of the chefs. He caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod. She smiled back, grateful for his quiet support. But just as she was about to leave the kitchen, one of the waiters approached her, looking a little frantic. "Alice, we've got a problem," he said, his voice urgent. "One of the ovens isn't working. We're going to fall behind on orders." Alice's heart skipped a beat. This was exactly the kind of crisis she had been dreading. She had to act fast. She quickly took charge, calmly instructing the staff to manage the situation while she figured out the best course of action. It wasn't easy, and for a few moments, it seemed like things might spiral out of control. But with quick thinking, teamwork, and a bit of creativity, Alice helped the team make adjustments and keep the orders flowing. By the end of the night, the restaurant was still buzzing with satisfied customers. The ovens were fixed, the staff was energized, and the event was a success. Alice found herself standing by the door, watching the guests leave with smiles on their faces. She could hardly believe what had just happened. Keanu approached her, a smile playing at his lips. "You did it. The grand opening was a success." Alice smiled, her exhaustion melting away for a moment. "We did it. Thank you for believing in me." Keanu gave her a knowing look. "I've always believed in you." As the night ended and Alice made her way home, she reflected on how far she had come. There would be more challenges ahead, no doubt, but she was beginning to realize that success didn't mean perfection. It meant resilience, teamwork, and staying true to herself. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a part of something much bigger. The weeks following the grand opening were a blur of excitement and uncertainty. Alice found herself growing more comfortable in her role, but the weight of responsibility was constantly on her shoulders. The restaurant, now a staple in the city's dining scene, was getting rave reviews, but with success came challenges. The pressure to maintain the standard of excellence was relentless, and Alice often felt as though she were walking a tightrope. Keanu remained a steady presence in the background, always offering support but rarely interfering unless absolutely necessary. Alice had grown accustomed to his quiet confidence and found herself increasingly relying on him for advice. Yet, there were times when his silence felt like a test. He never told her exactly how to handle the challenges that came her way. Instead, he would ask questions that made her think. One afternoon, as Alice sat in the office sorting through invoices, her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. It had become a bit of a ritual for Linda to check in, offering Alice a comforting word or two whenever she could. "How's the restaurant world treating you? You managing not to pull your hair out?" Alice smiled and quickly typed back. "It's a roller coaster, but I think I'm getting the hang of it. The place is booming, but there's always something that needs fixing. Just trying to keep up." Linda's reply was almost immediate. "Sounds like you're handling it like a pro. Proud of you, girl. Just don't forget to breathe." Alice laughed softly. Breathe. It was advice she needed more than ever. Sometimes, it felt like she was always running, always trying to stay one step ahead of everything. The kitchen was constantly humming with activity, the wait staff moving at lightning speed, and the front of the house was filled with customers eager to experience the restaurant's food and atmosphere. There was no time to stop and take a breath, at least, that's how it felt. One evening, after a particularly hectic shift, Alice found herself standing by the door, watching the last of the guests leave for the night. The restaurant had been packed all evening, and although she was proud of the work her team had done, she was exhausted. The stress of balancing everything, managing the staff, handling customers, overseeing the daily operations, was starting to weigh on her. Keanu noticed her standing there, looking drained. He approached quietly, his footsteps barely making a sound. "Long night?" he asked gently. Alice gave him a tired smile. "You could say that. It feels like we're running on fumes at this point." Keanu chuckled softly. "I know the feeling. But hey, the place is running better than ever. You're doing a great job. She nodded, but inside, the doubt was creeping in again. But I feel like it's never enough. There's always something new to fix, always another problem to solve. I'm constantly putting out fires. Keanu's expression softened. You're doing exactly what you need to do. This is how it works, especially when things are growing as fast as they are. It's not about eliminating problems, it's about handling them as they come. Alice let out a sigh, running a hand through her hair. I just want to make sure everything stays perfect. Perfection isn't the goal, Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. The goal is progress. Every day, you get a little bit better. Every day, the restaurant gets a little bit better. And that's enough. Alice looked at him, surprised by the wisdom in his words. He had a way of cutting through the noise and getting to the heart of the issue. You make it sound so simple, Alice said with a half-smile. It is simple, Keanu replied. It's just not easy. They stood there for a moment, both of them watching the restaurant as the last of the staff finished cleaning up. It was late, but Alice felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a while, she felt like maybe she could actually do this. Maybe she wasn't just the girl who had insulted Keanu that day. Maybe she was the person capable of running this restaurant and making it successful. The next few days were quieter. The kitchen ran like a well-oiled machine, the wait staff was in sync, and Alice found herself getting into a routine that, although demanding, felt more manageable. But even with things seemingly settling down, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. One afternoon, Alice received a call from Keanu. Hey Alice, I need you to come into the office for a quick meeting, he said, his tone serious but not urgent. Alice's heart skipped a beat. Keanu never called her into meetings unless something important was happening. Sure. I'll be there in 30. When she arrived at his office, Keanu was sitting behind his desk, reviewing some papers. He looked up when she entered, his expression neutral. Have a seat, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Alice sat down, trying to suppress the anxiety that was bubbling up inside her. What's going on? Keanu took a deep breath. We've been offered a partnership with a major investor. They're interested in expanding the restaurant into multiple locations. They see the potential, and they're willing to back us financially. Alice blinked, trying to process the information. Wait, so we're talking about expanding? Into more locations? Exactly. But it's not a decision we can take lightly, Keanu continued. The pressure to maintain the standard of quality would increase, and we'd have to consider a lot of factors, staffing, supply chains, even the overall direction of the brand. It's a big step. Alice felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Expansion was a huge deal. It was an exciting opportunity, but it also carried a tremendous amount of risk. The stakes would be higher, and the challenges would be multiplied. Keanu looked at her, his gaze steady. I want you to think about it. I value your opinion, and you're a key part of this restaurant's future. If we do this, we'll need to do it together. Alice's mind raced. This was the moment of truth. This was the chance to take everything to the next level, but it could also be the moment that shattered everything they had worked so hard to build. I'll think it over, Alice said quietly, her mind already turning over the possibilities and consequences. Keanu nodded, standing up and walking around the desk to stand beside her. Take your time. But know that whatever we decide, I'm with you. This is a team effort. Alice left the office that day with a heavy heart. Expansion could make or break the restaurant. It wasn't just about the food anymore, it was about reputation, growth, and managing a much larger operation. And with the weight of that decision looming over her, Alice knew that she had to make the choice carefully. The next step was crucial. The days following Keanu's proposal felt like a blur for Alice. She couldn't shake the thought of the partnership, the expansion, the responsibility. Every night, after the last customer had left and the team had cleaned up, Alice would sit in the quiet of her office, staring at the numbers, the projections, the plans for the future. Should they expand? Was she ready for that kind of responsibility? She wasn't sure. On one hand, the idea of growing the restaurant into something bigger was exhilarating. The thought of more people experiencing the unique atmosphere they'd created was thrilling. But on the other hand, Alice knew that with growth came an entirely new set of challenges. The personal connection they had with each customer would be harder to maintain. The intimate atmosphere of the restaurant would have to be carefully replicated at each new location. And most daunting of all, could she handle the pressure of running multiple high-end restaurants? The question hung over her like a storm cloud. Keanu had told her to take her time, but the clock seemed to be ticking faster with each passing day. The potential investor had given them a deadline. They wanted an answer soon. One afternoon, as Alice sat at a cafe, sipping her coffee, she received a call from Linda. "Hey, how's everything going?" Linda's cheerful voice broke through Alice's haze of uncertainty. "I'm honestly not sure," Alice replied, rubbing her temples. "Keanu wants to expand the restaurant. We've been offered a partnership with an investor, and it's a huge deal. But I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I'm ready to run multiple locations. It's so much more than I ever imagined when I first started this journey." Linda was silent for a moment. Then, she said, "Look, I get it. It's a big decision. But think about it this way, are you going to let fear stop you from going after something great?" Alice stared out the window, watching people bustle by. "I don't know if it's fear," she said slowly. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to lose the quality, the experience we've built here. We've worked so hard to create something special, and what if it all falls apart?" Linda's voice softened. "But what if it doesn't? What if this is your chance to build something even bigger, something that lasts? You're not alone in this, Alice. You've got a team, and you've got Keanu. And most importantly, you've got the heart for it. You can make it work." Alice exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of Linda's words. Heart. That's what had driven her all along. The desire to build something meaningful. To create a place where people felt welcome, where they could share moments over a delicious meal. But was she ready to scale that vision to something bigger? "I don't know," Alice said, her voice barely a whisper. "I just keep thinking. What if I'm not the right person for this?" Linda paused, and when she spoke again, there was a quiet certainty in her voice. "What if you are? What if this is exactly what you've been working towards all along?" Alice closed her eyes, trying to calm the storm inside her mind. Linda's words gave her something to hold on to, something to believe in. Maybe the fear wasn't the problem. Maybe it was the doubt. She thanked Linda for the call and promised to think things through. But as the day went on, something started to shift inside her. She began to realize that, no matter what decision she made, the fear of failure would always be there. It wasn't about avoiding it, it was about moving forward despite it. The next evening, Alice sat down with Keanu in the restaurant's quiet, private dining room. She had asked him to meet her there, away from the bustling restaurant floor, so they could talk without distractions. Keanu had noticed the change in her. The uncertainty that had been clouding her thoughts was now replaced with a quiet determination. "I've been thinking," Alice said, her voice steady. "About the expansion. The investor. Everything." Keanu leaned back in his chair, giving her space to speak, his expression open but expectant. "I'm scared," Alice continued, her gaze unwavering. "I won't lie. This is a huge decision. And I'm not sure I'm ready for it." Keanu nodded. "I get it. It's not an easy thing to take on. But you don't have to do it alone. You have a team here, and we can take it step by step. No one expects you to have all the answers right away." Alice felt a weight lift off her shoulders at his words. "I know. And I appreciate everything you've done for me. But I've realized something important. I'm never going to feel fully ready for this. It's always going to be a leap of faith. And maybe that's okay. Keanu smiled slightly, his eyes filled with understanding. You're right. There's never a perfect time for big decisions. But it's the small, imperfect steps that get us where we need to be. So, what's your decision? Alice took a deep breath. I think I'm ready. I'm ready to take the next step. But I want to do it in a way that still honors everything we've built here. I want to make sure we don't lose the soul of this restaurant as we grow. Keanu's smile grew. That's the spirit. And I believe we can do that. We'll take it one step at a time, and we'll make sure it's done right. A sense of calm washed over Alice. She had made her decision. The fear would always be there, but it wasn't going to stop her. The next morning, Alice called the investor and agreed to move forward with the partnership. It was a huge step, and it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But she was no longer paralyzed by fear. She was ready to embrace the challenge, knowing that whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. And as she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. The decision had been made. The restaurant was moving forward with the expansion, and Alice had never felt a mix of emotions quite like this before. It was as if her life had shifted overnight. There were moments when excitement took over, and she was overwhelmed with the possibility of what lay ahead. Then, just as quickly, doubts would creep in, threatening to paralyze her once again. But no matter how many times those doubts resurfaced, Alice knew she couldn't turn back now. This was the path she had chosen. The first few weeks after the announcement were filled with meetings, phone calls, and planning. The investor was eager to move quickly, which meant Alice and Keanu had to prepare for the rapid changes that were coming their way. It was a whirlwind, and the pressure of it all seemed to intensify with every passing day. Keanu had been an anchor for Alice throughout the process, offering quiet wisdom and support when things got tough. They'd spent long hours together, discussing logistics, menu planning, and the future of the brand. While Alice had always known that Keanu was brilliant in the business sense, the more she worked with him, the more she realized how deeply invested he was in this venture. There was something undeniably magnetic about him, an energy that drew people in and made them believe in the possibilities. And Alice couldn't deny that she admired him more with each passing day. As the expansion plans moved forward, the restaurant's success continued to grow. Word spread quickly about the new locations, and Alice found herself juggling even more responsibilities than before. The pressure mounted, and yet, there was an undeniable sense of excitement in the air. This was what they had been working toward, this was the next step. One morning, Alice found herself standing at the construction site of the first new location. It was still in its early stages, a mere shell of what it would eventually become. She was overseeing the process, ensuring that every detail would align with the restaurant's vision. But as she stood there, looking at the empty space, it was hard not to feel a twinge of fear. Could she really pull this off? Could she translate everything they had built at the original location into this new, unfamiliar territory? Keanu appeared beside her, his presence steady as always. He surveyed the space with a thoughtful expression, taking in the raw potential of the room. "It's going to be beautiful," he said, breaking the silence. Alice nodded, trying to swallow the lump in her throat. "I hope so. But it feels like there's so much riding on it. I don't want to mess this up." Keanu turned to her, meeting her gaze. There was no judgment, only understanding. "You won't. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do. You've built something incredible, Alice. And now it's time to share it with more people." She took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. "I guess that's the thing, right? It's not about being perfect. It's about moving forward, even when the next step feels uncertain." "Exactly," Keanu agreed, his tone firm and reassuring. "You've got what it takes. You've always had it." Alice smiled, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Keanu. I don't know if I could do this without you." Keanu simply nodded, offering a quiet smile of his own. "We're in this together." The days that followed were a blur of meetings, design plans, and logistical hurdles. Alice found herself at the restaurant more often than ever before, overseeing both the daily operations and the expansion process. Every minute was accounted for, every decision felt crucial. One night, after a particularly chaotic shift, Alice collapsed into one of the booth seats in the restaurant. Her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts, but her body screamed for rest. Keanu appeared beside her, offering a bottle of water. "Long night?" Alice accepted the water, cracking open the lid. "Understatement of the year. It feels like we're running at full speed and not slowing down anytime soon." Keanu sat down across from her, his gaze calm as always. "I know the feeling. But you're doing great. The team is stronger than ever, and the restaurant is thriving." Alice took a sip of water and sighed. "It's just so much. Between this location, the new one, the staff, the investors, it's hard to keep everything in balance." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. But you're not doing it alone. Lean on the team, and lean on me when you need to." Alice looked at him, grateful for his unwavering support. There were days when she felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But in moments like this, she knew she didn't have to carry it alone. Keanu was there. And so were the people who had joined her in this journey from the very beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the second location took shape. The construction was on track, the team was in place, and Alice was finding a new rhythm in managing both restaurants. It wasn't easy, but she had come to realize that nothing worth doing ever was. She spent more time in meetings with the investors, refining the vision for the new locations and how they could remain true to the original while still expanding into new territories. The delicate balance of growth and maintaining authenticity became her primary focus. It was a constant dance, one that was both exhilarating and exhausting. But through it all, Alice found herself growing, evolving into a leader she had never imagined she could be. The woman who had once been uncertain of her abilities now stood confidently in the face of every challenge that came her way. One day, while reviewing the plans for the third location, Alice received a message from Linda. It was a simple text, but it carried a weight of meaning that Alice needed in that moment. "You've got this. You always did. Just keep moving forward. You're going to do amazing things." Alice smiled at the message, feeling a surge of energy. It was exactly the encouragement she needed. And for the first time in a long while, Alice believed it too. She was doing something incredible. She was creating something that mattered, something that would last. The journey was far from over, but with every challenge, Alice was becoming the person she had always hoped she could be. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The new restaurant location was nearing completion, and Alice could feel the excitement building. The months of planning and hard work were starting to pay off, and the physical space, once an empty shell, was now beginning to take shape into something beautiful. The layout, the ambience, the fine details, everything was being meticulously put into place. It was a reflection of the restaurant's vision, just on a larger scale. Keanu had been a driving force throughout the entire process. His experience in business and his ability to anticipate potential problems had been invaluable. Together, they had managed to secure talented chefs, managers, and staff who shared their vision for the new restaurant. Alice couldn't help but feel a sense of pride when she walked through the space. But the closer the opening date drew, the more the pressure seemed to mount. There was still so much to do, so many last-minute decisions to make. Each day felt like a race against the clock. One evening, after another long day of overseeing final preparations, Alice sat alone in the restaurant's office. She stared at the plans for the next location, the investor's contract, and the projections. The weight of it all started to feel suffocating. Was she truly ready for this? There were days when the thought of running multiple restaurants felt impossible, as though the challenges would overwhelm her. Could she balance the needs of both locations and continue to grow the business while maintaining the standards that had made their brand unique? Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from KEANU. "You look like you need a break. Meet me at the bar for a drink. We've got a lot to celebrate." Alice smiled at the message. She had to admit, she needed a break. She needed to step away from the numbers and the stress for a few minutes. It was time to reconnect with KEANU, and remind herself why they had started this journey in the first place. The bar area was a bit quieter that evening, and KEANU was already there, leaning against the counter, looking relaxed despite the whirlwind they'd both been in for the past several months. He had an aura of calm about him that always seemed to help Alice center herself. "Cheers to the new restaurant," KEANU said as he handed Alice a glass of wine. His smile was warm, but there was something behind his eyes that seemed thoughtful, almost introspective. Alice clinked her glass against his. "Here's to that," she said, but she couldn't help but feel a twinge of uncertainty. "And to the future." KEANU raised an eyebrow, sensing the hesitation in her voice. "What's on your mind, Alice?" Alice set her glass down on the counter, then glanced around the bar, trying to find the right words. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this. The pressure, the constant juggling. The thought of running 2 restaurants, it's just so overwhelming." KEANU's expression softened, and he slid onto the barstool beside her. "You're doing great. You know that, right?" Alice shook her head. "I'm not so sure. Sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head. And the bigger we get, the harder it feels to keep everything together." KEANU studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. Then, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Alice, listen to me. You've created something amazing here. This restaurant, this team, it's because of you. You've put in the work. You've made the tough decisions. You've been the heart of this place from the beginning. And you can do it again. Maybe in a different way, but you have the experience. And you have me." Alice felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had always known that KEANU was a rock in her life, but hearing him speak with such conviction made her feel more confident. "Thanks, KEANU. I don't want to lose sight of what made this place special." "You won't," he assured her. "I promise you, this expansion doesn't mean losing what's important. It's about taking what you've built here and sharing it with more people. More experiences. More memories." Alice took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words sink in. Maybe she didn't have to carry all of this by herself. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about continuing to take the next step, even when things were uncertain. As the night wore on, Alice found herself feeling lighter. The conversation with KEANU had reminded her of the passion that had driven her to open the restaurant in the first place. This was an opportunity to bring that passion to more people, to more communities. The fear was still there, but it was no longer paralyzing her. She could do this. Alice stood in the center of the dining room, watching the staff move efficiently through the space, interacting with guests, delivering food with the same care and attention that had made the original location such a success. She couldn't help but smile as she watched the restaurant come to life. This was her dream, a dream that had seemed so far out of reach just a few short years ago. But now, it was a reality. KEANU appeared beside her, offering a quiet smile. "You did it." Alice nodded, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't fully allowed herself to feel until now. "We did it," she corrected him. KEANU's eyes twinkled with a touch of pride as he gave her a nod of approval. "Here's to many more." As the night unfolded, Alice stood back and took it all in. The restaurant was bustling, the atmosphere was vibrant, and there was a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known she could feel. The challenges were far from over, but for the first time, Alice felt ready for whatever came next. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and the staff had cleaned up, Alice and Keanu sat together in the quiet of the restaurant. It had been a long, exhausting day, but there was a calm sense of satisfaction in the air. "I'm proud of you," Keanu said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. Alice smiled, exhaustion mixing with contentment. "Thank you, Keanu. I couldn't have done it without you." Keanu nodded. "We've got more work to do. But for tonight, we've earned this." Alice looked around the restaurant once more, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of peace. This was her future. And it was only just beginning. The grand opening was behind them, and the excitement of the new restaurant's success began to settle into a familiar rhythm. As Alice walked through the bustling space, checking on the team, answering questions, and making sure everything was running smoothly, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The energy was good, better than good, actually. The food was getting rave reviews, the staff was professional and friendly, and the restaurant had made a name for itself in the neighborhood almost overnight. But despite all this, Alice couldn't ignore the quiet tension she felt as she navigated through her day. The first signs were subtle, small mistakes by the staff, minor inconsistencies in customer service, and a creeping exhaustion that seemed to build with each passing day. It wasn't enough to jeopardize the operation, but it was enough to make Alice uneasy. She had seen this before, back when the original restaurant had started to grow. There was always an undercurrent of pressure that went unnoticed until it exploded into a bigger issue. She found herself in the office late one evening, once again alone with the plans and projections. Her phone buzzed with a message from Keanu, a welcome distraction from the overwhelming number of tasks piling up. "How's everything going? I'm coming by in a few minutes. I'll bring some coffee." Alice smiled at the message. No matter how hectic her day was, Keanu always seemed to know how to make things feel more manageable. She quickly typed a response. "Could really use that coffee. See you soon." Keanu arrived a short time later, as promised, with 2 cups of coffee in hand. He handed one to Alice and took a seat across from her, his casual demeanor a contrast to the swirling thoughts in her mind. "How are you holding up?" Keanu asked, his tone warm but perceptive. "You seem a bit off tonight." Alice let out a heavy sigh and leaned back in her chair. "I'm just tired. And I don't know, something feels wrong. Like we've hit a point where we're doing all the right things, but it's not enough." Keanu raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not surprised. "What do you mean?" Alice explained the small issues she had noticed, the minor service slip-ups, the slight tension in the air, the ever-growing list of things that needed her attention. She admitted that while everything looked perfect on the surface, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were one mistake away from losing the balance they had worked so hard to achieve. Keanu listened carefully, taking a sip of his coffee. "You're right. There are always growing pains when you scale up. It's normal. But here's the thing, you're not in this alone. We've got a team, and they're here to help carry the load." Alice nodded, but the uncertainty lingered. "I know. I can't help but feel responsible. If something goes wrong, it's on me. I'm the one who decided to take the leap." "You're not wrong," Keanu said gently. "But that's what leadership is, Alice. It's about navigating these challenges, and doing it with the confidence that you'll figure it out as you go. No one has all the answers. But that's why we have each other." Alice stared at her coffee for a moment, trying to absorb his words. "I keep thinking about the bigger picture, the growth, the new locations, and I'm scared of losing the essence of what we've built. I don't want to sacrifice what made us special." Keanu's eyes softened as he spoke. The heart of what makes this place special isn't just the food or the atmosphere, it's you. Your vision. Your passion. As long as you stay true to that, everything else will follow. Alice felt a sense of calm wash over her. Keanu's belief in her was unwavering, and it reminded her of the resilience she had shown from the very start. Yes, the challenges were real, and yes, the weight was heavy at times, but she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The next few days were filled with a whirlwind of meetings, staff evaluations, and fine-tuning the restaurant's operations. Alice made an effort to address the issues she had noticed, sitting down with the staff to discuss the expectations and responsibilities that came with being part of a growing brand. She made sure to emphasize the importance of teamwork and communication, reassuring everyone that it was okay to lean on each other when things got tough. As much as Alice loved being in the trenches, overseeing every detail, she knew she had to let go of some of the control. If the business was going to thrive, she needed to trust her team to step up and take ownership of their roles. That meant learning how to delegate, and that was something Alice hadn't always been good at. But Keanu had been right. They were building something bigger than just the two of them. It wasn't just about her vision anymore, it was about the collective effort of everyone involved. A week later, Alice found herself at the original restaurant, overseeing the dinner rush. The familiar hum of the busy kitchen, the clinking of silverware, and the sound of laughter filled the air. It was a sense of chaos she had come to love, a reminder of the hard work it took to get to this point. As she walked through the dining room, checking on tables, she noticed the familiar face of Linda sitting with a group of friends. Alice made her way over, offering a smile. "Well, well," Linda said with a grin, her eyes twinkling. "Look at you, all grown up with your second location. It's like I don't even know you anymore." Alice chuckled, feeling a sense of pride at the remark. "I haven't changed that much, have I?" Linda raised an eyebrow. "I'd say you have. But it's in the best way possible. I can see how much this means to you." "It does," Alice said, her voice sincere. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm taking on too much too fast." Linda's expression softened, and she leaned in, her voice quieter. "You're doing great. And even when things feel overwhelming, you've got a whole team behind you. Don't forget that." Alice smiled, grateful for Linda's constant support. She had always been a grounding force in Alice's life, and hearing her words of encouragement brought a sense of reassurance. "I won't forget," Alice promised. As the night went on, Alice realized that while the road ahead would always have its challenges, she had the tools and the team to overcome them. She had built this from the ground up, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her now. When the restaurant quieted down and the staff was finishing up their shifts, Alice stood at the door, watching the last customers leave. The restaurant was still standing strong, and so was she. The future was uncertain, yes. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The excitement of the new restaurant had begun to wear off, replaced by the steady grind of keeping everything running smoothly. While Alice had always prided herself on her ability to handle stress, she was now finding that managing two successful restaurants at the same time was beginning to feel like an insurmountable challenge. The new location was thriving, but the amount of attention it required had left her feeling stretched thin. The restaurant at the original location was starting to show signs of wear. There were complaints about long waits, and some of the staff had begun to show signs of burnout. Alice had always worked hard to create an environment where employees felt valued, but with all the pressure mounting, she couldn't help but feel like she was failing them. The team had been a key part of her success, and now she was afraid that she wasn't doing enough to keep them happy and motivated. Keanu had warned her that the honeymoon phase wouldn't last, but she didn't expect it to hit this hard, this quickly. The truth was, Alice had underestimated how much effort would be required to maintain the same high standards at both locations while also ensuring they were continuing to grow. She found herself staying up late at night, obsessively checking the restaurant's social media and reviews, trying to catch any negative feedback before it could snowball. The constant worry was exhausting, and the worst part was, she wasn't sure who she could talk to about it. One evening, after a particularly hectic day, Alice met Keanu at the bar, looking more worn out than usual. He had a way of noticing when she was at her breaking point, and tonight was no exception. Keanu raised an eyebrow as Alice sank into the seat beside him. "Tough day?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Alice sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Keanu. I feel like I'm losing control of everything. The staff isn't as motivated as they used to be, the customers are starting to get impatient with the longer wait times, and I'm just tired." Keanu studied her for a moment before speaking. "You know you don't have to do this alone, right?" Alice gave him a tired smile. "I know, but it doesn't always feel that way. I have a responsibility to the people who work for me, and I don't want to let them down. But at the same time, I can't keep running myself into the ground like this." Keanu's expression softened. "You've already built something incredible, Alice. But you have to take care of yourself, too. If you burn out, the restaurant will suffer, and so will the people who are relying on you. It's okay to ask for help." Alice bit her lip, staring down at the counter. "I guess I just don't know where to start. It feels like everything needs my attention all at once." Keanu leaned back in his chair, giving her some space to think. "Maybe it's time to start delegating more. You've built a strong team, right? Let them take on more responsibility. You don't have to oversee everything yourself. Trust them to make decisions and support them when things go wrong." Alice nodded slowly, taking in his words. She knew he was right. She had built a team that was capable and dedicated, but she had been holding on too tightly, afraid that if she let go even a little, everything would fall apart. It was time to trust them more, to let them take the reins and share the load. "But what about the bigger picture?" Alice asked. "What about expanding even more? We've barely scratched the surface with these 2 locations." Keanu gave her a knowing smile. "You don't have to do everything at once. Focus on making these 2 locations as strong as they can be before you think about expanding further. Slow and steady wins the race, remember." Alice let out a small laugh, appreciating the wisdom in his words. "You always know what to say." "That's what I'm here for," Keanu said with a grin, raising his glass to her. The following weeks were a turning point for Alice. She made a conscious effort to delegate more of the day-to-day operations, trusting her team to handle the details while she focused on the bigger picture. It wasn't easy, and at first, it felt like giving up control. But as the days passed, Alice began to see that her team was more than capable of running things without her hovering over them every second. She also began to spend more time with the team, checking in with the staff at both locations and listening to their concerns. As much as she wanted to focus on the big picture, Alice realized that keeping her team happy and motivated was just as important. The restaurant's success had always been rooted in the sense of family they had created, and she couldn't afford to let that slip away. Keanu continued to be a supportive presence, offering advice when needed and helping Alice stay grounded. He reminded her often that the restaurant was more than just her vision, it was a collective effort, and that was what made it special. One evening, as Alice was leaving the restaurant, she ran into Linda again. This time, Linda wasn't sitting with friends but was standing by the door, looking thoughtful. "You look like you're doing better," Linda said with a smile, noticing the lighter energy in Alice's demeanor. "I am," Alice replied, offering a genuine smile. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that I don't have to do everything myself." Linda nodded in approval. "That's a big step. The best leaders know when to ask for help, and they trust their team to get the job done. I'm proud of you, Alice." Alice felt a sense of warmth in her chest. Linda's words meant a lot to her. "Thanks, Linda. That means more than you know." As she walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, Alice realized that she was starting to find a new balance in her life. The pressure was still there, but she no longer felt like it was crushing her. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but she was learning how to navigate them with more grace and confidence. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was the key to making it all work. The evening shift at the original location had gone smoothly, and Alice felt a rare sense of relief as the last of the guests left and the staff began cleaning up. After weeks of feeling as though she were constantly running on empty, tonight had felt different. There were fewer mistakes, fewer rushed moments, and a calm energy settled over the place. Alice took a deep breath as she stood in the middle of the dining area, looking around. The restaurant had grown into something incredible. There were still challenges to face, but Alice had learned how to handle them better. She had learned to rely on her team and trust that they could manage things in her absence. Her life had begun to feel more balanced, and the future seemed brighter than it had in weeks. KEANU had been a huge part of that shift. His presence in her life had helped her realize that she didn't have to shoulder everything herself. They had been spending more time together lately, and their connection felt more natural than ever before. Still, there was an unspoken tension that lingered. Alice wasn't sure where things stood between them. The lines between friendship and something more were blurred, and she wasn't certain if either of them was ready to cross them. Just as Alice was lost in thought, her phone buzzed with a text message from KEANU. "I'm coming over in 15 minutes to help you close up." Alice smiled at the message. There was a sense of comfort in knowing he'd be there, but she still couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that clouded her mind when it came to him. She pushed the thought aside, telling herself she had bigger things to focus on. As promised, KEANU arrived shortly after, his usual easygoing smile lighting up the room. He made a beeline for the bar, taking a seat while Alice finished up her paperwork. "How was the evening?" he asked, leaning back and stretching his arms. "Pretty smooth, actually," Alice said, glancing up from her notes. "It's been a good night. I think things are finally starting to feel like they're running on their own." KEANU grinned. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve a little peace after everything you've been through." Alice let out a breath and sat down next to him. "It's been a long road, but I'm getting there. It's still a lot of work, though." KEANU nodded knowingly. "It always is, but you're handling it. Trust me." Alice appreciated his words. They'd shared so many moments like this, casual, yet meaningful. But tonight, there was an undercurrent she couldn't ignore. KEANU had been more than just a mentor and a friend, he was becoming something else in her life, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Still, she couldn't shake the fear of what a romantic relationship could mean for their dynamic, especially with the restaurant requiring so much of her attention. As if sensing her unease, KEANU's tone shifted. "You know, Alice, I've been thinking a lot about everything lately. About the future." Alice looked up at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment, the smile fading slightly. "I think you've got something special here. But I also think it's time to start thinking bigger. We can't just focus on running these 2 locations anymore. We need to take this to the next level. I want to help you do that." Alice's stomach fluttered at his words. She had always known that KEANU was incredibly talented and ambitious, but hearing him speak like this made her nervous. "What are you saying? You want to open more restaurants?" KEANU nodded, his expression intense. "Yes. But more than that. I'm talking about taking the brand to new markets. Expanding nationally. You've already proven this concept works. Now we need to take it further." Alice swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just about growth anymore, it was about a huge leap, something that could completely change everything. Could they really do this? Was it the right time? "I don't know," Alice said quietly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "It's a huge step. We've barely kept our heads above water with the 2 locations. How can we even think about expanding on that level?" KEANU leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. We have the foundation. You've built something people care about, something that stands out. And we have the resources now to push for growth. Yes, it's going to be difficult, but you've always been able to overcome challenges. Why should this be any different? Alice paused, her thoughts racing. Could she handle this kind of pressure? Could she trust herself, and her team, to take on something so monumental? As much as she had grown, as much as she had learned to trust others, the idea of growing even further scared her. It wasn't just about the logistics, it was about the personal risk. But then, she thought about everything she had already overcome, the original restaurant's tough start, the fallout from losing a key team member, the constant worry of failure. She had faced all of that and come out stronger. Maybe this new challenge wasn't so different after all. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, Keanu, she admitted, her voice softer. It's a huge leap, and I don't want to make the wrong decision. Keanu reached over, placing a reassuring hand on hers. You don't have to make it alone. We'll figure it out together, like we always do. Alice met his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. There was something comforting in knowing that Keanu was by her side. But there was also a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. If she took this leap, everything would change, not just her professional life, but her personal life as well. Would she be ready to give up the safety of what she knew for the unknown? Just then, Alice's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Linda. Hey, just checking in. Hope things are going well at the restaurant. You know you can always reach out if you need to talk. Alice stared at the message for a moment, her thoughts swirling. Linda had been a steady support throughout all of this. Maybe it was time to talk to her about the next steps, to get some perspective from someone who wasn't directly involved in the business. I think I need to talk to Linda about this, Alice said, looking up at Keanu. I need to get some clarity before making a decision this big. Keanu nodded, giving her an encouraging smile. I get it. Take your time. But remember, whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. Alice couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of her decisions was becoming unbearable. Every time she closed her eyes, she was bombarded with thoughts of the future, her mind racing with what-ifs and maybes. The expansion plan Keanu suggested had haunted her for days, each moment filled with uncertainty. There were so many risks, so much at stake. If she failed, what would that mean for the people who depended on her? What would it mean for her? She had never been the type to run from challenges. But this challenge felt different. The consequences felt so much greater than anything she had faced before. It wasn't just her future on the line anymore, it was the future of the entire business, the team she had worked so hard to build, and the dreams she'd carefully nurtured. The tension in her chest was constant. She felt it when she woke up in the morning, when she walked through the restaurant doors, when she sat down at the bar with Keanu. Even when she tried to focus on the positive changes she had made, the internal pressure just kept building. The little victories didn't seem to matter as much as the looming question of whether she was ready to take the next big leap. It had been 3 days since Alice had received Keanu's offer, and it wasn't getting any easier to decide. She had spoken to Linda, seeking some guidance, but even her mentor's wise words hadn't calmed the storm in her mind. Take your time, Linda had said, but don't forget that waiting too long to decide can be just as dangerous as rushing into a decision. Alice knew Linda was right. She couldn't let indecision hold her back, but the fear of making the wrong move kept her paralyzed. With each passing day, the pressure to make a choice weighed more heavily on her, and she could feel it spreading into every corner of her life. One evening, Alice found herself sitting alone in the corner of the restaurant at a quiet table. It was a rare moment of solitude. The restaurant had closed for the night, and the crew had already finished their cleanup. Keanu had promised to meet her here, but for the first time, Alice wasn't sure if she was ready to talk to him about it. He had been so enthusiastic about the expansion plan, so certain of their success, but Alice wasn't sure if she shared that same conviction anymore. The excitement of the initial idea had dulled, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty that was hard to ignore. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She looked up to see Keanu walking toward her, his usual smile in place. "Hey," he said softly, taking the seat across from her. "I figured I'd find you here." Alice managed a weak smile. "Yeah. I needed some time to think." Keanu's gaze softened, sensing the shift in her mood. "Have you made a decision?" She shook her head, exhaling sharply. "I don't know, Keanu. I'm scared." Keanu didn't respond right away, letting the silence hang between them. He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I get it," he finally said, his voice steady. "You've built something incredible here, and I know you're afraid of losing it all if things don't go as planned. But remember, no one ever grows without taking risks. There's always going to be fear, Alice. It's how we move past it that counts." Alice gazed at him, his words striking a chord deep within her. She had heard the same sentiment before, but for some reason, it felt different now. Keanu had always been the bold one, the risk-taker. He thrived on challenges, his confidence something Alice had admired from the start. But she wasn't sure if she could simply follow his lead without considering all the potential fallout. "Maybe I'm just not as fearless as you," Alice said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu's eyes softened, his smile fading slightly. "I'm not fearless, Alice. I'm just willing to try. And if I fall, I pick myself up and try again. You don't have to do this perfectly. You just have to try." Alice's heart raced, her mind swirling with his words. She had been so focused on avoiding failure that she had forgotten what it felt like to take a leap of faith. But was this leap too big? Would she really be able to keep everything she had worked for intact, or would the risk consume her? "You make it sound so easy," Alice said, shaking her head, the frustration clear in her voice. "But it's not, Keanu. It's not easy. And what if I fail? What if everything falls apart?" Keanu leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "Then we rebuild. Together. Nothing worth having comes without risk, Alice. I believe in you. And I believe in what we've created here. It's bigger than just you, bigger than just me. It's something we've both built. And I know we can take it to new heights if we do it right." Alice's chest tightened, but his words ignited something inside her. The path ahead was uncertain, but perhaps that was part of the journey. If she continued to run from the uncertainty, she'd never know what she was capable of. If she chose to play it safe, would she regret it forever? Just as Alice was about to respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" "Alice," came a familiar voice on the other end. It was Linda. "I know you're busy, but I have some news that might be important. There's an investor who's been following your restaurant for a while now. They're interested in partnering with you." Alice's heart skipped a beat. "What? Who?" "I can't say much just yet, but I think this could be an opportunity for you to take things to the next level without bearing all the risk alone. You should at least hear them out." Alice was silent for a moment, her mind racing. An investor. Was this the answer she had been looking for? Could this be the way to grow without completely sacrificing control? She glanced at Keanu, who was watching her with a mix of curiosity and support. "I'll set up a meeting," Alice said finally, her voice steady. "I think it's time I take the next step." As Alice hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over her. It wasn't the decision she had expected to make tonight, but it felt like the right one. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She had a team, a support system, and now a potential partner who could help them achieve their dreams. The unknown wasn't as scary when she realized she didn't have to face it by herself. Keanu smiled at her, his eyes twinkling with pride. "That's the spirit, Alice. You're ready. And no matter what happens, I've got your back. As Alice looked around the familiar space of the restaurant, she felt a new sense of resolve. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid to take the next step. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Alice had scheduled a meeting with the investor Linda had mentioned, and the anticipation was building. She had done everything she could to prepare for the conversation, but no matter how much research she did or how many questions she had rehearsed, there was a constant buzz of nerves in her stomach. This was a pivotal moment, one that could define the future of everything she had worked for. Keanu had been a steady presence through all of this. He was there when she needed him, offering advice when asked, but always reminding her that this decision was ultimately hers to make. Even so, Alice couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something monumental. The day of the meeting arrived with a mixture of excitement and dread. Alice stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her blazer for the umpteenth time. She had picked out something professional but still approachable, something that would help her feel confident. But nothing could quite prepare her for the gravity of what was to come. "Ready for this?" Keanu's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway. He had come over to offer a ride to the meeting, as he had done so many times before, but today there was something different about him. His presence was steady, calming, just like it always had been. Alice smiled, though it was tight with nerves. "I'm as ready as I'll ever be." Keanu gave her an encouraging look. "You've got this. Just remember, this is your vision. You're the one who's built this, and you're the one who knows what's best." Alice nodded, grateful for his support, but she could still feel the doubt gnawing at the back of her mind. Was she really ready to take that step? To open up to someone else's influence on her creation? She took a deep breath and followed Keanu out to his car. They didn't talk much during the drive. Keanu seemed to sense that Alice needed the quiet. The city was alive around them, buzzing with activity, but Alice felt removed from it all. Everything seemed to hinge on the meeting, and the weight of that was heavy. When they arrived at the sleek, glass-fronted office building, Alice felt a momentary spike of anxiety. The investor's office was located in one of the tallest buildings in the city, a symbol of success and influence. As they entered the lobby, Alice was struck by the polished professionalism that radiated from the space. The towering glass windows overlooked the city skyline, and the sterile, immaculate decor screamed wealth and power. "Breathe, Alice," Keanu said quietly, sensing her tension. He gave her a reassuring smile and offered his arm for support as they entered the elevator. "You belong here." Alice took another deep breath and smiled back. "I hope so." The investor's office was everything Alice had imagined, sleek, modern, and intimidating. A tall man in his early 40s with a sharp suit and an even sharper gaze greeted them. His name was Richard Larson, and he exuded the kind of confidence that came from years of building empires. "Ms. Foster," he said with a firm handshake, his voice smooth but businesslike. "I've been following your restaurant's success for quite some time. It's rare to see such potential in a business so young." Alice fought to keep her composure as she shook his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Larson. It's been a lot of hard work, but we're proud of what we've built." Richard gestured for them to sit down at the large, glass conference table. "I've been impressed by how quickly your brand has grown. It's clear you've tapped into something that resonates with people. But the question I have is, what comes next?" Keanu spoke up before Alice had a chance to respond. "We're looking to expand, but we want to do it thoughtfully. We've made a lot of progress with the 2 locations we have now, and Alice has built a strong team. But we need capital, and we need the right guidance to take the next step." Richard nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's where I come in. I've helped many businesses scale, but I don't do things lightly. This isn't about just pumping money into a project, it's about helping you grow the right way. You need a partner who understands the market, who can guide you through the pitfalls of expansion." Alice listened closely, trying to read between the lines. She had always been wary of people who spoke in terms of grandiose promises. Could Richard really offer what they needed, or was he just another player looking to make a quick profit? And what exactly does that partnership look like? Alice asked, her voice steady but cautious. Richard smiled, though it was more calculated than warm. I'm offering you both a chance to take this to a national level. In exchange, I would want a stake in the business, 50%. Alice's stomach tightened at the number. 50%. It was a large chunk of her creation. She had never imagined giving up that much control, but at the same time, the potential for growth was undeniable. I'm not sure about that, Alice said slowly, her mind racing. I've built this business from the ground up. Giving away half of it feels risky. Keanu spoke up then, his voice unwavering. I get that. But we can't do this alone. You know that. If we want to make the leap, we need the right kind of support. Richard has the experience. And, more importantly, he has the resources to help us reach our full potential. Alice glanced at Keanu, searching his face for any hint of doubt. But there was none. He was all in. And, for the first time in a long while, Alice realized that maybe it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the team they had built, the people who believed in the vision they had started together. They couldn't afford to be afraid of taking risks if they wanted to achieve something bigger. Richard sat back, watching Alice carefully. You'll have to think about it. It's a big decision. But remember, opportunities like this don't come often. When they do, you have to be ready to take them. The meeting ended shortly after, and Alice and Keanu left the office in silence. Alice's mind was still reeling from the proposal, but there was something different in her now. She had always been the one carrying the weight of the restaurant on her shoulders, but now she was faced with the possibility of something even bigger. This wasn't just about her, this was about their future, about all of the people who had invested their time, effort, and dreams into this restaurant. Keanu didn't say anything at first. But as they reached the car, he turned to her and said, "This is the moment, Alice. You don't have to do it alone anymore. We can do this together." Alice nodded, feeling both scared and relieved at the same time. The decision was hers, but she knew she didn't have to carry the burden by herself. And for the first time in a long time, that thought gave her a glimmer of hope. The days following the meeting with Richard Larson were a blur for Alice. She spent her time reviewing every aspect of the potential partnership, trying to weigh the pros and cons. Keanu was right, this was a huge opportunity, one that could take their business to places they had only dreamed of. But at the same time, it felt like a gamble. Alice had poured her heart and soul into this restaurant. The idea of giving up 50% of it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Every night, after the restaurant closed and the team had gone home, Alice would sit alone in her office, staring at the plans for the future she had drawn out. The vision was there. The dream was alive. But could she really trust someone like Richard Larson to guide them? Could she share the reins of something she had built from the ground up? She didn't talk to Keanu much in those days, though he continued to offer his unwavering support. He had always been the optimist, the one who believed in taking risks, and Alice appreciated that. But she couldn't ignore the fear that crept in late at night, whispering that she might be losing control, that maybe she was in over her head. One evening, as Alice was sitting at the bar, sipping her drink in deep thought, Keanu approached. "You still thinking about Larson?" he asked, sitting beside her. Alice nodded, not looking up. I don't know if I can do it. 50% is a lot. And what if it's the wrong move? What if I regret it?" Keanu watched her for a moment before responding. "You're the one who knows best, Alice. No one else can make this decision for you. But you're also the one who's been carrying this place on your back for years. And look at where it is now. You've built something special. And if you want to take it further, you might have to let go of a little control." Alice's fingers gripped her glass tighter. But what if I can't let go? What if I lose everything I've worked for? Keanu smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. You won't. But you have to trust yourself. And you have to trust that there are people who want to see you succeed. I'm not saying Larson's the only one. But there's no harm in hearing him out. You've been holding on to this business with both hands, Alice. Maybe it's time to let go just a little and see what happens next. Alice finally met his gaze, his words settling into her mind like a stone sinking into the water. She had always prided herself on being able to handle everything herself, to prove she didn't need anyone's help. But maybe it was time to admit that she couldn't do it alone anymore. If she truly wanted to reach the potential she saw in her business, she needed to step out of her comfort zone. She needed to take that leap. I'll meet with him again, Alice said finally, her voice steady but thoughtful. But I need to know that he's really on our side. That he's not just looking for a quick return. Keanu smiled and nodded. That's the spirit. You'll know if it's the right fit when you talk to him. The following week, Alice met with Richard Larson again. This time, she had a list of questions, doubts, and concerns she needed answers to. The meeting was scheduled at Larson's office again, but this time, Alice wasn't as nervous. She was ready to ask the hard questions. She was ready to make sure that whatever happened, she wouldn't be blindsided. As she walked into Larson's office, he greeted her with the same polished smile. Alice, good to see you again. I trust you've had some time to think over my proposal. I have, Alice replied, taking a seat across from him. But I still have some concerns. I've worked hard to get this restaurant to where it is, and I can't afford to make any rash decisions. Richard nodded, his demeanor professional. I understand completely. And that's why I'm here. I want you to be confident in this partnership. You deserve to feel secure in whatever choice you make. Alice laid out her list of questions, one by one. How involved would Larson be in the day-to-day operations? What kind of influence would he have over the vision of the restaurant? What was his long-term plan for the business? To Alice's surprise, Richard answered each question thoughtfully, without the usual corporate gloss. He made it clear that his goal wasn't to take over but to support her growth. He was in this for the long haul, and he wasn't interested in rushing things. If they moved forward, it would be at a pace Alice was comfortable with, and he would respect the vision she had already built. As the meeting continued, Alice felt her reservations start to melt away. Richard wasn't just some faceless investor looking to make a quick buck. He genuinely seemed to believe in what Alice had created and wanted to help it grow, at least, that's what he was saying. After the meeting, Alice felt a strange sense of relief. She wasn't sure if she had completely overcome her doubts, but she had learned enough to know that Richard Larson wasn't the enemy. He was a potential ally, someone who could help them expand without completely losing control. It wasn't the easy decision she had hoped for, but it was a decision that could shape the future of the restaurant in ways she hadn't imagined. Keanu was waiting for her in the car, looking at her expectantly as she climbed in. How did it go? I'm still not sure, Alice said, leaning back in the seat. But I think I'm closer to knowing what I need to do. Keanu smiled, his eyes lighting up with understanding. Sometimes the best decisions take time. But you're getting there. Trust your gut, Alice. Alice nodded, her thoughts racing once again. There were still so many factors to consider, so many risks to take into account. But now, more than ever, she knew that she couldn't stand still. She had to move forward. Whether it was with Larson or on her own, she had to make a choice. That night, Alice lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the meeting in her mind. She couldn't help but think back to everything Keanu had told her, everything Linda had taught her. Success didn't come from playing it safe. It came from taking risks, embracing the unknown, and trusting in herself and the people around her. Finally, she made up her mind. She would take the next step. She would move forward, but she would do it on her terms. She wouldn't let fear dictate her future. And she certainly wouldn't let go of everything she had worked for. Tomorrow, she would tell Richard Larson her decision. The morning sun peeked through the blinds of Alice's apartment, casting long shadows across the room. She had barely slept the night before. Her mind had been racing, filled with questions and doubts, but now it was time to put those aside. She had made her decision. No more second-guessing. No more fear of what might happen next. Alice was ready to take control of her future, whatever that might look like. She stood in front of the mirror in her kitchen, running her fingers through her hair and adjusting her blazer. It was a simple outfit, nothing too extravagant, but today felt different. Today, she was about to make a choice that could change everything. "Are you sure about this?" Keanu's voice interrupted her thoughts, and Alice turned to see him standing in the doorway of her apartment. He had come over early to check in before the meeting with Richard Larson. Alice smiled, her nerves still there, but steady. I'm scared, but I think this is the right move. It's a lot to take in, you know." Keanu nodded, his expression calm. "I get it. But you've thought this through. I can see it in your eyes. You're ready." Alice exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the butterflies in her stomach. She had always been the one who had to carry the weight of the restaurant, who had to make every decision. But now, with the possibility of a partnership on the horizon, she felt like she was handing over a piece of that weight. And in a way, that was both liberating and terrifying. When they arrived at Richard Larson's office, the atmosphere felt different. Alice wasn't as intimidated this time. She had gone over everything in her mind, rehearsed her thoughts, and was ready to speak from a place of confidence. This was her business, and she would decide the future. Not Larson. Not anyone else. Richard greeted them with his usual polished smile and firm handshake. "Ms. Foster, Mr. Reeves. It's good to see you both again. I trust you've had time to think over everything." "I have," Alice replied, her voice steady. "And I've made my decision." Richard's eyebrows raised slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to come to a conclusion so quickly. "I'm eager to hear it. Please, take a seat." They sat down at the large conference table, and Alice could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her. This was the crossroads. The point where everything could either explode into success or implode under the weight of the risks. But no matter what happened, Alice knew she had to trust herself. "I've been thinking a lot about what you proposed," Alice began, meeting Richard's eyes. "And while it's a big step, I've decided that I'm willing to move forward with the partnership. But on one condition." Richard's eyes lit up with interest. "And what would that be?" "I'm not willing to lose control of the vision I've built. I'm looking for a partnership, not a takeover. I want to retain creative control, especially when it comes to the restaurant's atmosphere and the way we treat our customers. I need to know that you'll support the heart of this business, not just the bottom line." Richard leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I can appreciate that, Alice. And I agree. A partnership means both sides having a say. I'm not here to make you compromise your vision. My expertise will be there to guide you, not to override your instincts." Alice felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had feared that Larson's ambitions might override her own, but his words made it clear that he was willing to listen. This could work. It was going to be a delicate balance, but she was ready for it. "I want to take this slow," Alice continued. "I don't want to rush into anything. We can start with one new location and see how it goes. If things go well, then we can talk about expansion." Keanu, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "I think that's a great idea. It gives us a chance to see how the partnership really works before we go full throttle." Richard nodded, considering Alice's words. "That seems reasonable. I'm here to help, but I'm not in a rush to push things forward. If you're willing to move forward with one location, then we can start by getting the paperwork in order. Once that's done, we'll begin planning. The paperwork was signed shortly after the meeting, and within days, Alice's world was officially on a new trajectory. The plan was set in motion. A new location was going to be launched, and Larson's involvement would begin with providing financial backing and strategic support. But Alice was determined to keep the restaurant's identity intact. She would lead this with the same passion and drive that had brought it to life in the first place. Keanu remained by her side through it all, helping to oversee the day-to-day operations and acting as her sounding board. It felt like the old days, like when it was just the two of them, working tirelessly to make the restaurant a success. But now, there was a sense of possibility in the air, something Alice hadn't felt in a long time. They were on the edge of something bigger. Weeks passed, and the new location started taking shape. It wasn't just a copy of the original, it was an expansion of the vision Alice had worked so hard to build. The design, the menu, the atmosphere, everything was carefully planned to reflect the essence of the restaurant, while also appealing to a new demographic. Alice worked tirelessly, reviewing every detail, checking every plan, and making sure that this new location would be just as successful as the original. But it wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when Alice questioned whether she was doing the right thing. The pressure to succeed, to live up to the promises she had made to Larson, was mounting. She had to balance her creative instincts with the demands of the partnership. Sometimes, it felt like a juggling act, one wrong move, and it could all come crashing down. Keanu was there, as always, reminding her to stay focused. "You're doing great," he would say. "You're building something that's bigger than yourself. It's going to take time, but we've got this." But Alice wasn't sure. There were days when she doubted everything. Was she giving up too much? Was this truly the right path? One evening, as she sat in her office, reviewing the final plans for the new location, Keanu knocked on the door. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, a gesture of support that had become routine between them. "Thought you might need this," he said with a smile. Alice took the cup, grateful for the warmth it offered. "Thanks. I've been so caught up in this. I barely know what day it is." Keanu sat down across from her, watching her carefully. "You've done something amazing, Alice. Don't forget that. You've taken a risk, and no matter what happens, you've created something that people love. That's something to be proud of." Alice met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Keanu. You've been my rock through all of this." Keanu smiled. "And I'll always be here. No matter what happens next." As Alice looked at him, she realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she wasn't facing them alone. She had her team, her vision, and the drive to see it through. And that was enough. The day had arrived. The long months of planning, designing, and preparing had led to this pivotal moment, the grand opening of the new restaurant location. Alice stood at the entrance of the building, taking in the sight of the bustling street in front of her. The sign above the door gleamed in the sunlight, the name of the restaurant bold and welcoming. She felt a rush of emotions, excitement, nerves, pride. This wasn't just a new location, it was a new beginning. It represented the future of the restaurant, the culmination of her hard work, and the partnership with Richard Larson that she had cautiously embraced. She had pushed through the doubts, the moments of fear, and now, it was time to see if it would all pay off. Keanu was standing beside her, grinning from ear to ear. He had been with her every step of the way, just like he had when they first started out. Together, they had faced every challenge that came their way, and now, they were on the verge of something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. "Are you ready for this?" Keanu asked, his voice full of excitement. Alice smiled, her heart racing. "I don't think I've ever been more ready for anything in my life." Behind them, the new location buzzed with activity. Staff members were finishing their preparations, chefs were plating dishes, and waiters were practicing their routines. It was chaotic, but it was a controlled chaos. This was the moment they had all worked toward. The opening ceremony went off without a hitch. Local media, influencers, and loyal customers gathered outside, eagerly awaiting the chance to step inside the new restaurant. The energy was electric, a mix of anticipation and excitement that was palpable in the air. Alice could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She had learned over the years that she thrived in these high-pressure moments. As she made her way inside the restaurant, she was greeted by Richard Larson, who was already mingling with guests and giving a few interviews to the press. He spotted Alice and gave her a nod of approval, his usual calm demeanor in place. "You've done it," Richard said as she approached. "It looks incredible." Alice felt a sense of accomplishment but remained focused. "It's not just me. It's everyone. We're all in this together." Richard smiled, his eyes scanning the bustling room. "True. But you've led this. This is your vision, and now it's a reality. You should be proud." Alice glanced around at the full restaurant, the lively chatter of happy customers, the satisfied smiles on her staff's faces. It was everything she had hoped for, and more. But she knew this was only the beginning. There was still a long road ahead. As the evening wore on, Alice made her rounds, checking in with the staff, ensuring that everything was running smoothly, and talking to the customers. She was on cloud nine, basking in the glow of success, but there was still a part of her that was holding her breath. The real test would come when the novelty of the new location wore off. Would the restaurant continue to thrive? Would the partnership with Richard Larson turn out to be everything she had hoped for? It wasn't long before Keanu found her again, slipping into the kitchen to deliver a fresh cup of coffee. He looked more relaxed now, his usual easygoing self returning after the initial rush of the evening. "You okay?" Keanu asked, his gaze searching hers. Alice smiled, her nerves calming a little. "Yeah. I think I'm good. It's just, a lot." Keanu grinned. "I can't believe how far we've come. Remember when it was just us, working behind the bar and trying to keep the place running?" Alice laughed softly. "Yeah, I do. Seems like a lifetime ago." Keanu's expression softened as he looked around the restaurant. "It's incredible, Alice. I'm proud of you. We're all proud of you." Alice felt a lump in her throat. She had come so far from the unsure young woman who had first opened the restaurant, afraid of failure and unsure of herself. Now, she was a businesswoman, a leader, someone who had taken risks and embraced challenges. And most importantly, she had a team that believed in her. "Thanks, Keanu. I couldn't have done it without you. You're a big part of this, you know that." Keanu gave her a wink. "Don't get all sentimental on me. We've still got a lot of work to do." Alice chuckled, grateful for his steady presence in her life. She needed him just as much now as she had when they were scrubbing dishes and running around like crazy. Together, they had built something special, and now, they were watching it grow. Later in the evening, when the last of the customers had been served and the lights dimmed, Alice stood in the middle of the restaurant, surveying the empty tables. The quiet hum of the kitchen was the only sound left. It was a moment of stillness, a brief pause before the next rush. Keanu joined her, leaning against the bar with a satisfied grin. "Well, that's it. The grand opening is over. We survived." Alice smiled back at him, her heart full. "We didn't just survive, Keanu. We thrived." And that was the truth. They had faced challenges, taken risks, and built something that people loved. The restaurant was thriving, and with Richard Larson's backing, Alice knew that they were only just getting started. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was no longer afraid. She was ready for whatever came next. As Alice walked to the back of the restaurant to gather her things, she took one last look at the dining room. The restaurant was more than just a place of business, it was her heart, her dream. And as she locked the door behind her, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength, the passion, and the team to overcome them. She had taken the leap of faith, and now, it was paying off. The days following the grand opening were a blur of excitement and exhaustion. The new restaurant location was doing better than anyone had anticipated, and Alice found herself fielding calls from press, investors, and customers eager to be a part of the success story. She had learned to handle the pressure, but it didn't make the weight any lighter. Every decision, every move mattered. But she was no longer afraid. She had come a long way from the young woman who had started out with nothing but a dream and a small restaurant. Now, she was part of something bigger, something that was growing and evolving. She had built a legacy, not just for herself, but for the team she had surrounded herself with, including KEANU, who had been by her side every step of the way. One afternoon, as Alice was reviewing the week's sales numbers in her office, KEANU knocked on the door and entered with a wide grin on his face. "You'll never guess who called this morning," he said, practically bursting with excitement. Alice looked up from her papers. "Who?" "Richard Larson," KEANU said, sitting on the edge of her desk. "He's really impressed with how well everything is going. He wants to talk about expanding even further." Alice's heart skipped a beat. She had always known that the potential for expansion was there, but the thought of moving even faster, taking on more locations, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Do you think we're ready for that?" Alice asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. She trusted KEANU, but this was a big leap. KEANU leaned forward, his smile never fading. "I think we're more than ready. You've built something amazing here. People are loving it, and we're only scratching the surface." Alice stood up, her gaze shifting to the window, where the city's skyline stretched out before her. The possibilities were endless, but so were the risks. It was a familiar feeling, standing at the edge of something new, wondering if she was making the right choice. "I've never been this sure of anything in my life," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But I want to make sure we don't lose what makes this place special. No matter how big we get." KEANU nodded. "We won't. We'll make sure of it. The heart of the restaurant is you, Alice. That's what makes it work." She turned to him, meeting his eyes. "I couldn't do this without you, you know." KEANU smiled, a little sheepishly. "You've always been the one driving this. I'm just here to help you get where you need to go." Alice chuckled softly, feeling the weight of his words. She was the one who had started it all, but he was the one who had been there every step of the way, offering support, guidance, and, most importantly, friendship. Later that day, Alice met with Richard Larson at his office. The conversation was everything she had hoped for and more. Richard laid out his vision for the next phase of their partnership: new locations, more investments, and the potential to turn the restaurant into a well-known brand. But Alice remained cautious. "We've done well so far," Alice said, leaning back in her chair. "But I'm not looking to compromise the soul of this place. I've worked too hard for that." Richard smiled, his expression understanding. "I'm not asking you to. The idea is to grow, yes, but to maintain the things that make your restaurant unique. We can expand without losing the essence of what makes it special." Alice nodded, feeling more at ease. For the first time, she truly believed that they were on the same page. The partnership wasn't just about business, it was about preserving the values and vision she had worked so hard to create. "We're ready," Alice said firmly. "Let's do it. Let's start planning the next steps." Richard extended his hand across the table, a gesture of finality. "To the future, then." As the weeks passed, plans for the new locations began to take shape. Alice and KEANU worked closely with Richard and his team to select new areas for expansion, ensuring that each location would maintain the same level of quality, atmosphere, and heart as the original. The pressure was mounting, but Alice felt more confident than ever. One evening, as the restaurant closed and the staff began cleaning up, Alice stood in the middle of the dining room, staring out at the empty tables. It was a familiar sight, but tonight, there was a sense of accomplishment that made everything feel different. She had made it. She had taken the leap and survived. And now, she was poised to grow even further. Keanu walked up beside her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I can't believe how far we've come." Alice smiled, taking the cup he handed her. "Neither can I. It feels like a dream." Keanu sipped his coffee, his expression thoughtful. "You know, there's something amazing about how all of this started. It was just you and me, running around like crazy, trying to make it work. And now look at us." Alice chuckled, remembering the chaotic early days. "We've come a long way. But it was worth every second." Keanu glanced around the room, taking in the full extent of what they had built together. "You've built something great here, Alice. You've created a place where people feel like family. That's the magic. And no matter how big we get, we can't lose that." Alice felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Keanu had always been there, from the very beginning. Through the hard days and the good, he had never once wavered. He had believed in her, believed in their dream, even when she hadn't been sure herself. "I won't lose it," Alice said, her voice filled with determination. "I won't lose what made this place ours." The months that followed were filled with hard work, but also moments of triumph. The new locations opened to great success, and the brand began to take on a life of its own. People came from all over to experience the warmth and quality that Alice had built into every aspect of the restaurant. As the restaurant continued to grow, so did Alice's sense of fulfillment. She had achieved what she once thought was impossible, and yet, the journey was far from over. There would always be challenges, new obstacles to overcome, but now she knew she was ready. She had learned that success wasn't just about the bottom line, it was about staying true to what you believe in, about holding on to the things that matter most. Alice stood at the front of the new restaurant, watching the hustle and bustle around her. The laughter of the customers, the chatter of the staff, the clinking of glasses, everything was just as it should be. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a community, a place that people came to feel at home. And as she looked around, she realized that the future was wide open. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. She had taken the leap of faith, and now, it was all unfolding before her eyes. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?